Well. Look at what just walked back into the room. Look at what just stood up straight, shoulders back, eyes forward, carrying something in the chest that none of them can name, but all of them can feel. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't send a warning. You didn't hand out press releases or beg for attention or explain your movements to people who never deserved the explanation in the first place. You simply appeared. And the second you did, every room changed. They felt it before they saw it. That shift in the air, that drop in temperature, that invisible pressure that makes small people instinctively look for the exit when something real enters the space. They couldn't explain why their mouths dried up. They couldn't explain why their confidence suddenly felt borrowed. They couldn't explain why the story they'd been telling about you, that rehearsed, polished, carefully curated little fiction, suddenly sounded hollow even to their own ears. Because something was different. Something was standing behind you. Something was walking with you that they could not see, could not touch, could not calculate, and could not fight. And that's when the questions started. Quiet at first. A whisper in a group chat. A raised eyebrow across a room. A conversation held in parked cars at midnight because they needed to ask each other the one question that had started keeping them up. Who is behind this person? Who is protecting them? Who is standing in the dark at their back making sure they don't fall? That question. That single, trembling question. It broke them before you said a single word. Because the truth, the real, devastating, irrefutable truth, is that the answer to that question is something they will never fully understand. The force behind you isn't one they can bribe. It isn't one they can network their way into. It isn't one they can copy, corrupt, or cancel. And when they finally started to piece together what's been moving on your behalf, the screaming began. Let's begin. Because what's been happening to you isn't luck. It isn't coincidence. It isn't timing. It is something far older, far quieter, and far more terrifying than anything they were prepared to face. And every single person who bet against you is about to understand exactly what they touched. Before we begin, if this resonates with something deep inside you, The Quiet Edge, Grim Grit Edition 2 is the book that goes even further. Get your copy now, link in the description. Let's go back. Not too far, just far enough to remind you where this started. Because before the shift, before the silence, before the thing that changed in you that nobody could explain, there was a period of exposure, a period where you were visible in ways that made you vulnerable, where your plans were half formed and your wounds were half open, and your name was sitting on the table like a card everyone felt entitled to pick up and read. They were watching then. Oh, they were watching so carefully, not out of love, not out of concern, not out of the kind of attention that lifts people. No, this was surveillance. This was the kind of watching that happens when someone can't decide whether they're more afraid of your success or more excited by the possibility of your failure. They tracked your posts. They monitored your silence. They counted the gaps between your appearances and filled those gaps with narratives stitched together from jealousy and projection. They sat in circles, real circles, digital circles, circles inside circles, and they dissected you. They pulled apart your character like they were looking for something rotten. They measured your confidence and called it arrogance. They measured your quiet and called it weakness. They measured your resilience and couldn't name it, so they just stared at it with the kind of resentment you only feel towards something you know, deep down, you cannot replicate. And you were feeling all of it. Every whisper landed. Every false story found its way to you eventually. Every betrayal from people you'd trusted with real parts of yourself. It all arrived, sometimes gently, sometimes like a hammer. And for a moment, just a moment, it looked like it was working. It looked like the weight of their collective campaign against you was winning. It looked like you were bending under the pressure of being misrepresented, misunderstood, mislabeled, and mistreated by people who had no right to any opinion of you. But here is what they didn't see. Here is what their surveillance completely missed. While they were watching the surface of you, something was moving underneath. Something was being built in the foundation of you that no amount of external pressure could reach. They were so busy watching your face that they never noticed what was being fortified in your spine. They were so focused on the performance that they completely missed the transformation. And by the time they realized what had happened, the person they thought they had studied so carefully was already gone, and something else was standing in that space entirely. Here is where it gets uncomfortable for them. Here is where the story stops being about their cruelty and starts being about something they have no framework to process. Because at some point in your journey, and you know exactly the moment I'm talking about, you remember the exact silence. It came in. Something shifted its weight toward you. Something aligned. Something that had been patient, that had been watching, not in the way your enemies watched, but in the way a craftsman watches a material they've been waiting to work with, finally moved. And when it moved, things started happening that had no logical explanation. Doors that should have stayed closed fell open with no effort. Conversations that should have gone sideways somehow landed perfectly. Opportunities arrived, not from the people who smiled at your face, but from the exact direction you would never have thought to look. Resources materialized. Clarity arrived. The right voices entered the room at the right moment. And people who had spent years positioning themselves as obstacles to you suddenly found themselves moved, out of the way, without drama, without confrontation. Quietly, almost politely relocated to somewhere they could no longer reach you. They noticed. Of course they noticed. When you're obsessively watching someone waiting for them to fail, and the failure never comes. When you've planted every seed, you know how to plant, and none of them take root in the way you expected, you start to get scared. Not of the person, of what's around the person, of what seems to be accompanying them through spaces that should have swallowed them whole. So they started asking, and the asking became its own kind of terror, because there was no answer. There was no mentor they could identify, no network they could infiltrate, no backer they could find records of, no obvious human explanation for why you kept walking out of situations intact. You weren't loud, you weren't political, you weren't working the room in the way they understood power to be worked. You were just protected. And protection without a visible source is the most terrifying thing a calculating, manipulative, strategy-obsessed person can encounter. They can fight a rival. They can outmaneuver a competitor. They can slander a name, or poison a reputation, or cut off a resource. But they cannot fight what they cannot see. They cannot map what has no coordinates. They cannot cancel what carries no human author. And the force walking with you, that invisible, uncopyable, undeniable force, has no coordinates. It has no author they can find. It simply is. And it is entirely, completely on your side. Let's talk about what's happening to them right now, in real time, while you watch this. Because fear is a fascinating thing when it gets sophisticated. Unsophisticated fear runs. It hides. It cries in obvious ways. But sophisticated fear, the fear that lives in people who have built entire identities around control and calculation and strategic positioning, sophisticated fear doesn't run. It performs confidence louder than it ever did before. So right now, in whatever corner of the world they occupy, they are performing, they are posting, they are networking, they are name-dropping and alliance building, and making sure everyone in their circle knows how unbothered they are. They are laughing more loudly in public spaces. They are making pointed statements designed to reach your ears that communicate in the most calculated way possible. That they are not afraid of you, that they are not watching you, that you are not even a relevant thought in their thriving, untouchable, fully secured life. And every single performance is exhausting them. Because performance at that scale, the kind of performance required to mask genuine terror, takes everything. It takes sleep. It takes creativity. It takes the mental bandwidth that would otherwise be used to actually build, actually grow, actually create something worth having. Instead, every resource they have is being funneled into the maintenance of an appearance of safety, an appearance of dominance, an appearance of a life that does not spend every quiet moment wondering what you're building and what's walking behind you and when it's going to arrive. They told their friends you were nothing. They said it with so much conviction that their friends believed them. But conviction that loud about a person you claim doesn't matter, that's not confidence. That is a man screaming into an empty field that there's nothing in the field. Confident people don't need to announce what they're not afraid of. Only scared people do that. Only people whose fear has grown so large that it requires constant verbal management do that. And now the secret is out. Now the thing they've been managing in the dark is visible in the light. And the visibility of it is precisely what's doing the most damage. Because once people around them see what they've been afraid of, once the social circle gets a look at you standing tall, carrying that protection, unbothered, unlabeled, undefeated, the questions stop being private. The screaming starts. And the first scream, as always, is the one that sounds most like, who is behind this person? Because they need it to be someone human. Because if it's someone human, they can compete with them. If it's something else entirely, if it's the kind of force that only attaches itself to people who have been forged in the right kind of fire, then they have no play, and they know it. Let's spend some time here, because this is the part they will never fully understand no matter how long they study you. This is the part that makes the protection possible in the first place. Because protection, like what you carry, doesn't arrive randomly. It doesn't land on people who haven't been prepared for it. It doesn't accompany someone through hell, unless that someone was built through the hell, inside the hell, by the hell, into something worth accompanying. Think about what they put you through, not in the way you used to think about it, carrying the weight of it like a wound. Think about it architecturally. Think about it as a construction process. Every betrayal was a test of your foundation. Every false narrative was a test of your self-knowledge. Every moment they tried to dim your light was a test of whether your source of light was internal or external. Every time they withheld access, sabotaged your name, closed doors in front of you, or smiled at your face while working against your back, every single one of those moments was a compression event. Pressure applied to a material to reveal whether it shatters or whether it hardens into something rare. And you hardened. Not into bitterness. Bitterness is a brittle material. It looks hard, but it breaks at the wrong temperature. No, you hardened into something far more durable. You hardened into clarity, into patience, into the specific kind of stillness that only people who have survived extended psychological warfare possess, the stillness of someone who no longer needs external noise to know who they are. They couldn't break you. And I don't mean that as a compliment or as encouragement. I mean it as a statement of structural fact. They tried the standard tools and found none of them worked, not because you were lucky, not because you were untouchable, but because of what you had been built from and built into. And that is what walks with you. That architectural integrity, that uncompromised foundation, that specific frequency that only forms in a person who chose, again and again, to remain clean when dirtiness would have been so much easier, when revenge would have felt so justified, when matching their energy would have been so satisfying. You chose, in silence, in private, at enormous cost to yourself, you chose not to become what was being used against you. And that choice, repeated daily for years, built something in you that cannot be constructed by ambition or strategy or networking alone. It can only be built by surviving, and surviving correctly. And you did. This section is for the ones who are especially uncomfortable right now. Not the overt enemies. They've made their position clear, and at least that clarity has its own kind of honesty. No, this section is for the ones who shifted. The ones who used to be in the front row of the campaign against you and have quietly, without announcement, without apology, without explanation, relocated themselves to a neutral position, or further. Some of them have moved so far from where they were that if you showed someone their current behavior next to their behavior 2 years ago, it would look like two different people. You know who they are. You've noticed. You've been too gracious to name them publicly and too intelligent to trust them completely, but you've noticed the shift. The DMs that started coming in after a long silence, the sudden supportive commentary, the subtle distancing from people who are still loudly positioned against you. The way they started mentioning your name in rooms where they previously would have pretended they didn't know it. You've watched it happen, and you've kept your face neutral and your strategy private, as you always do, but you've understood what it means. It means they saw something. It means in whatever capacity they have to observe the situation, they detected the protection. They felt the shift in the weight distribution. They sensed that the bet they had placed, the social bet, the political bet, the reputational bet, was not going to pay out the way they had calculated. And rather than go down with the ship of people who are still screaming, "Who's behind him?" as if the answer will save them, they quietly got off. No announcement. No acknowledgement of the fact that they needed to get off. Just a repositioning that they will never fully explain and will probably never apologize for. Here is what you do with them. Nothing dramatic. You don't welcome them back with celebrations, and you don't punish them with exclusion. You simply let them occupy the neutral space they've chosen, and you observe what they do with it. Some of them will earn their way into the room over time with consistent behavior and genuine energy. Most of them won't. They'll be comfortable in the neutral zone, close enough to benefit from your rise, without being committed enough to be trusted with anything real. That's fine. They've already paid a price they don't know they've paid. They know what they are, even if they'll never say it out loud. And that knowledge lives in a person forever. We need to talk about your silence. Because of all the weapons in your arsenal, and you have more than they've counted, your silence is the one that has done the most sustained damage to the narrative they've been trying to construct. Your silence is the one that has aged the worst for them. Your silence is the one that, years in, they still cannot decode. They expected noise. When they first began their campaign, they built it on the assumption that you would respond, that you would defend, that you would take the bait in one of the 100 ways they dangled it in front of you, that you would get loud in the wrong room or cry in the wrong space or make a statement that could be screenshot and circulated as proof of everything they'd been claiming about you. They needed your reaction. Their strategy was architecturally dependent on your reaction. Without it, the whole structure had nothing to attach to, but you gave them nothing. Not cold, nothing, not the performance of silence that looks like bitterness, real silence. The silence of someone who has decided that certain conversations are beneath their energy allocation. The silence of someone who understands that responding to a fire with oxygen is not bravery, it's fuel. The silence of someone who looked at what was being offered the chance to defend themselves, to set records straight, to win arguments with people who had already decided the outcome, and chose instead to direct that energy somewhere it would compound. And that choice compounded. It compounded enormously. Because while they were waiting for your response and generating energy around the waiting, you were building, quietly, privately, without audience. And the build kept arriving in your posture, in your moves, in the caliber of the spaces you started showing up in the quality of the people who started aligning with you. The silence wasn't emptiness. The silence was the sound of construction happening at a frequency they couldn't hear. And now the building is visible. Now it's standing. And they're looking at it realizing that every hour they spent waiting for your response was an hour you spent making this, and they will never get those hours back. Your silence cost them years, and they will spend years more trying to understand how someone could be so comfortable saying nothing in the face of so much noise. The answer, the real answer, is that you knew something was walking with you that spoke louder than anything you could have said. You didn't need to be your own defense attorney. You had something else handling that, and it handled it better than you ever could have yourself. Let's answer the question. Because they've been screaming it long enough. Because it's bounced through enough group chats and late-night conversations and hushed exchanges in hallways that it deserves a real answer. Who is behind you? What is the force that keeps walking with you, keeps clearing your path, keeps bringing things to you that your credentials alone would not have guaranteed? What is the protection that they can feel but cannot name? Here is the answer. It is the weight of what you chose not to do. It is the accumulated force of every revenge you were entitled to and declined. Every burn you could have delivered and swallowed instead. Every moment you had leverage and used it for nothing because using it would have required becoming the thing you'd been fighting. That discipline, that sustained, unglamorous, frequently painful discipline of choosing who you are over what you could have gotten away with. That discipline generates something real, something that moves in the world on your behalf. It is the weight of your consistency, not the consistency of performance anyone can perform consistently when they're being watched. The consistency of character in private. The way you behaved in rooms where no one was taking notes. The way you treated people when there was nothing to gain from treating them well. The way you kept your word in situations where breaking it would have been invisible. That consistency built a specific kind of trust, not human trust, which is fragile and conditional and always subject to renegotiation, but a deeper structural trust. A trust that the universe extends toward people who have proven they can be relied upon when reliability is costly. And it is the weight of your pain that you transformed rather than transferred. Because everyone around you who's been operating from wounds, and look at them, really look at them, every decision they've made has been wound-driven, fear-driven, scarcity-driven. They've been spending their pain like currency, buying short-term advantages with long-term destruction. You held your pain, you turned it inward, and you processed it, and you let it change you, instead of weaponizing it against the world. And that transformation, that alchemical process of turning suffering into capacity, generates a force that has no human author. It simply exists. It walks with the people who have done this work. And it walked with you. That is who's behind you. The answer is everything you chose to become instead of what they tried to make you. And now they're realizing, screaming, really, genuinely screaming that they cannot fight a past. They cannot compete with a process. They cannot cancel a consequence. What you built and what built itself through you is not subject to their strategies. And that is the most terrifying sentence they have ever had to sit with. Oh, so they thought they were clever, didn't they? Hiring someone to break you professionally, clinically, systematically. They brought in the specialist, the one with degrees in manipulation, the one who studies human weakness like a surgeon studies anatomy. They paid top dollar for someone who could crack minds like safes. And they pointed him at you like a weapon. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have predicted, was that you weren't playing their game anymore. You were playing something much more dangerous, much more beautiful. You were playing the long game of transformation. And not just yours, but his. Let me paint you the picture, because this story deserves to be told in full color. They found him in some elite program somewhere. The kind of place where they teach psychological warfare as an art form, where they turn empathy into a scalpel and intuition into a trap. He had testimonials, references a track record of breaking the unbreakable, of making strong people question their own memories, their own worth, their own sanity. He was their nuclear option, their last resort, their checkmate move against someone who refused to break under normal pressure. They briefed him on. You showed him your file, your patterns, your supposed weaknesses. They gave him access to your history, your triggers, your soft spots. They armed him with everything they thought would destroy you from the inside out. And he accepted the mission with the confidence of someone who had never failed, who had never met resistance. He couldn't decode who had never encountered a soul that had already been through hell and learned to dance in the flame. The first meeting was textbook, wasn't it? He came in, smooth, professional, just helpful enough to seem genuine, just distant enough to maintain control. He used all the classic techniques, the mirroring, the false empathy, the strategic validation followed by subtle undermining. He was building rapport. They call it in the manual, establishing trust before the demolition begins. But you saw it all, didn't you? Every micro-expression, every calculated pause, every rehearsed gesture. You saw the strings before he even started pulling them. But here's where the story gets interesting. Here's where the game board flipped because you didn't react the way his training said you would. You didn't defend, you didn't attack, you didn't crumble or rage or beg for understanding. You did something his manual had no protocol for. You looked at him, really looked at him, past the performance, past the professional mask, past the careful construction of his identity, and you saw something he had buried so deep he forgot it existed. You saw his wound. Not the surface wounds everyone has, not the everyday disappointments and frustrations, but the core wound, the one that made him choose this profession in the first place, the one that made him believe that understanding human psychology meant controlling it, that knowing someone's pain meant owning them, that being the one who breaks others meant he could never be broken himself. You saw the child who learned too early that feelings were weapons, that vulnerability was death, that the only safety was in being the one holding the strings. And you did something that wasn't in any playbook. You didn't use what you saw against him. You didn't weaponize his wound or exploit his weakness. You did something far more dangerous, far more revolutionary. You showed him compassion, not the fake therapeutic kind he was trained to manufacture, but real, raw, unfiltered compassion. The kind that comes from someone who has walked through their own darkness and chosen to carry light anyway. The second meeting was different, wasn't it? He came prepared for resistance, for your defenses, for the walls he expected you to build, but instead he found doors, open, windows thrown wide, spaces he could enter but somehow couldn't violate because you weren't hiding anything, you weren't protecting anything, you were just being devastatingly, honestly, authentically yourself. And that terrified him more than any defense ever could, because his entire methodology was based on people having something to hide, something to protect, something to lose. He started making mistakes, small ones at first, forgetting his practiced phrases, letting real emotions slip through the cracks, staying in conversations longer than strategically necessary. His reports back to them became vague, then infrequent, then stopped altogether. Because how do you report that your target isn't a target at all, but a mirror showing you everything you've been running from? How do you explain that the person you were hired to break is instead breaking open every locked door in your own soul? You started sharing your story not as a victim, but as a survivor, not seeking sympathy, but offering understanding. You talked about the times you were betrayed, manipulated, gaslit into questioning your own reality. But you didn't talk about it with bitterness or rage. You talked about it like someone discussing weather patterns. Fascinating, destructive, but ultimately just energy moving through space. And you talked about healing not as erasing the past, but as composing something beautiful from the broken notes. And he listened, really listened, for the first time in years, maybe ever, because your story wasn't following the trauma narrative he was trained to expect. You weren't stuck in cycles of pain and revenge. You weren't defining yourself by what was done to you. You were defining yourself by what you chose to do with it. And that choice, that conscious, deliberate choice to transform poison into medicine, was something his training never prepared him for. He tried to maintain professional distance, tried to remember why he was there, what he was being paid to do, but every session became less about breaking you down and more about understanding how you built yourself back up. He started asking real questions, not the manipulative kind designed to find weakness, but genuine curiosity about how you survived, how you forgave, how you found peace in chaos and meaning in madness. Then came the day he asked the question that changed everything. Not a professional question, but a personal one. How do you know when you're healing versus just pretending to be okay? And the way you answered, the way you looked at him like you could see straight through to his soul, when you said healing feels like coming home to yourself. Pretending feels like performing for an audience that's never satisfied. That was the moment his professional mask didn't just slip, it shattered. You told him about the difference between healing and numbing, how healing hurts but leaves you stronger, while numbing feels safe but leaves you hollow. You told him about the courage it takes to feel everything fully, to let the pain move through you instead of around you, to stop using others as shields against your own emotions. And he was taking notes, but not for them, for himself. Because every word you spoke was addressing wounds he didn't even know were still bleeding. He started sharing his own story, incrementally, reluctantly, like someone learning to walk again after years in a wheelchair. He told you about the mentor who taught him that emotions were just data to be processed, and manipulated about the girlfriend who left him because he could analyze her feelings but never share his own, about the family who praised his success but never asked if he was happy, about the nights he stared at the ceiling, wondering if he even existed outside of other people's psychological profiles. You didn't comfort him, didn't try to fix him, didn't offer solutions, you just witnessed him. Fully present, completely accepting. And that acceptance, that non-judgmental presence, was more therapeutic than all his training combined, because he realized he had spent years studying healing but had never experienced it himself, had learned every theory of transformation but had never actually transformed. The turning point came when he finally admitted why he was really there, who had sent him, what he was supposed to accomplish. He expected rage, betrayal, the withdrawal of everything you had shared. But instead you smiled, not mockingly, not bitterly, but with genuine understanding, and said, "I know. I've known since the first day, and I chose to continue anyway because I saw something in you worth saving, even if you were sent to destroy me." That statement, that impossible grace in the face of betrayal, broke something in him that needed to break. The professional assassin of psyches crumbled, and what emerged was raw, desperate, and real. He asked why. Why would you do that? Why would you show kindness to someone literally paid to hurt you? And your answer rewrote his entire understanding of power, and healing. You said, because hurt people, but healed people heal people, and I chose to be the second kind. He broke down completely then, years of suppressed emotion flooding out like a dam bursting. He cried for the person he had become, for the people he had broken in the name of professional success, for the parts of himself he had murdered to become effective at his job. But mostly, he cried because someone saw all of that and chose to see him as worthy of redemption anyway, chose to see his potential instead of his sins. You sat with him through it all, not as therapist and client, not as target and weapon, but as two humans who had touched the extremes of human experience and chosen to return to center. You shared your practices, your daily rituals of self-compassion, your methods for transmuting pain into purpose. You taught him that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving everything, but about choosing who you wanted to become, regardless of who you had been. He started changing, not overnight, but in small, significant ways. He stopped taking contracts that required him to break people, started questioning the ethics of his profession, began seeing his clients as humans instead of puzzles to solve. His colleagues noticed the shift. Some mocked him for going soft. Others were threatened by his sudden development of conscience. But he didn't care, because for the first time in his career, he was actually helping people heal instead of just managing their dysfunction. He studied your approach not to replicate it, but to understand it, how you maintained boundaries without walls, how you stayed open without being vulnerable to exploitation, how you offered trust without naivety and strength without hardness. He realized that everything he had been taught about power was backward, that real power wasn't in controlling others, but in mastering yourself, not in breaking people down, but in building them up. The reports he had stopped filing were eventually noticed. Questions were asked, pressure was applied, but he had already made his choice. He went to those who hired him and returned their money, every penny plus interest. He told them the mission was impossible not because you were unbreakable, but because you were already broken and rebuilt in a way that made their entire paradigm obsolete. He told them they were fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons against the wrong enemy. They threatened him professionally, financially, even physically. But he had learned something from you that made their threats impotent. He had learned that when you've already lost everything and survived, when you've already faced your worst fears and walked through them, when you've already died and resurrected, metaphorically speaking, there's nothing left to threaten you with. You become untouchable, not because you're invulnerable, but because you're unafraid. He started using his skills differently. Now understanding manipulation meant he could recognize it in others and teach them to protect themselves. Knowing psychological triggers meant he could help people disarm their own bombs instead of setting them off. His practice transformed from breaking people open to helping them open safely, consensually healing in the process. He became what he had pretended to be for so long, an actual healer. But the real transformation went deeper than professional. It went to the core of who he was. He started feeling things genuinely, not analyzing them, but experiencing them. He started forming real connections, not strategic alliances, but actual relationships. He started living instead of just existing, performing psychological autopsies on everyone around him. He started being human, messy, imperfect, gloriously real human. He reached out to some of his former targets, the ones he had broken for money, with genuine remorse and offers of restitution. Some slammed doors in his face, others listened warily, a few even forgave him. And in each interaction, he practiced what you had taught him, that healing isn't a destination but a practice, that redemption isn't given but earned daily, that transformation isn't a single moment but 1,000 small choices. He started teaching, but not the old ways, not the manipulation tactics disguised as influence strategies, not the psychological warfare dressed up as communication skills. He taught vulnerability as strength, taught healing as power, taught authenticity as the ultimate influence. He became known not as the mind game master, but as someone who had played the game and chosen to stop, who had won by refusing to compete. The money he had accumulated from years of breaking people, he started redistributing not as charity, but as investment in healing centers, programs, therapies that actually helped people transform rather than just manage their pain. He funded research into trauma recovery, sponsored training for therapists who worked with survivors, created scholarships for those seeking to heal but lacking resources. He turned his blood money into medicine. He sought you out again months later, not as professional and target, but as someone seeking guidance, asking how to live with the weight of who he had been while becoming who he wanted to be. You told him something that became his North Star. You said the past isn't a prison, it's a teacher. The guilt isn't a punishment, it's a reminder of your capacity to feel. And the transformation isn't an escape, it's an integration of everything you've been into everything you're becoming. He started speaking publicly about his journey, not seeking absolution, but offering testimony that change was possible, that even those who seemed irredeemable could find redemption through choosing differently. He faced backlash from his former colleagues who saw him as a traitor, and skepticism from those who knew his history. But he persisted, because he had learned from you that the only opinion that truly matters is the one you have of yourself when you're alone with your truth. His old employers tried to discredit him, revealing his past tactics, exposing his methods, trying to paint him as dangerous, but every attack only proved his transformation more clearly, because he didn't fight back, didn't defend, didn't engage in the war they were waging. He simply continued his work, continued healing, continued choosing differently. And that consistency, that refusal to return to old patterns, spoke louder than any defense could. He developed his own methodology, now based not on breaking, but on building, not on control, but on collaboration. He called it conscious reconstruction, the practice of deliberately rebuilding yourself while fully aware of what you're building from. And his first principle, learned directly from you, was that healing begins the moment you stop weaponizing your wounds and start learning from them. He taught that everyone has a mind game master inside them, the voice that knows exactly what to say to cause maximum damage to yourself or others, and that the choice isn't whether that voice exists, but what you do with its intelligence. You can use it to destroy or to understand, to manipulate or to communicate, to break or to build. And that choice, that daily, hourly, momentary choice, is where transformation lives. His sessions became legendary, not for their techniques, but for their rawness. He would sit with someone and say, "I know what you're doing because I've done it. I know the games you're playing because I invented some of them. And I'm here to tell you that winning those games leads nowhere worth going. That the only victory worth having is the one where everyone walks away more whole than they came." He started working with other former manipulators, reformed predators, recovering narcissists, those whose healing journey required not just processing trauma, but acknowledging harm caused. He created spaces where accountability and transformation could coexist, where people could face who they had been without being forever defined by it, where redemption was possible, but had to be earned through consistent action, not just words. The people who had hired him to break you started experiencing their own breakdowns, not the kind he used to engineer, but the natural consequence of living in opposition to truth. They had built their empire on manipulation, on breaking those who threatened their control, and now their weapon had not just failed, but had been transformed into proof that their entire worldview was collapsing. Some of them reached out to him, seeking understanding. How had their perfect plan failed? How had their master manipulator been converted? What had you done to him? And he told them the truth. You had done nothing to him. You had simply been yourself so completely, so authentically, that it shattered every illusion he had about power and control. You had won not by playing the game, but by transcending it entirely. He became a bridge between worlds, translating the language of healing for those who only spoke manipulation, showing that vulnerability and power weren't opposites, but dance partners, demonstrating that the skills used to break people could be repurposed to help them rebuild, teaching that the same intelligence that maps someone's weaknesses can be used to reinforce their strengths. His foundation grew not just financially, but in impact, taking on cases others considered hopeless, working with people so damaged by manipulation and mind games that traditional therapy had failed them. And his approach worked because he could recognize every tactic, every game, every manipulation from the inside, could name them, disarm them, and teach others to do the same, turning his darkness into a lighthouse for others lost in similar storms.